Well, St Carthage is a 7th century Irish saint, a monk, and he came down to Lismore, which is on a river called the Backwater, and he was a very loved saint over centuries in the Waterford area. So when those Irish immigrants came to Melbourne, and many of them had little cottages around Parkville, they brought the name Carthage with them. And so a deal was done that they'd have a chapel of ease as part of St Mary's, West Melbourne Parish, and that this little end would be under the patronage of St Carthage. So that's where the name comes from. There is another one, a cathedral, Lismore in Ireland. Irish settlers came out and named an area in New South Wales, Lismore, and then it became the Diocese of Lismore. So there's another Carthage in the Cathedral Church of Lismore. Yeah, well, at the weekend here, there's about seats, about 300, and about another 50 stand about, and it fills pretty well at each of the masses. So you can get up to 1,000, but at this stage it's perhaps more around the 800 mark. And you tend to get a more elderly set, often retired religious, along with some young families come Saturday night. Sunday morning we tend to get a lot of the academics and families, and then Sunday nights more studenty, but the undergrads don't come that much. That's been a big change. It takes them a while to come to faith again, I think. So we get a lot of postgrads on Sunday evening, and that's when we have the visiting artist program, because I want to give them a sense of the church's treasury of music. So we have the Australian Chamber Choir would do a Mass, Palestrina with the Kyrie, the Sanctus, the Agnus Dei, a bit of Latin to give them a feel for our heritage. But then the next week you might have a string quartet, or you might have a classic harp, or we have a music group in the parish, which is more of a sing-along, bringing in the community in on the music. So each week the visiting artist program changes. That's at the 5 o'clock Sunday night, and then we would have more of a just hymns and singing part of the Mass at the other two Masses, Vigil and Sunday morning. Besides having the more public liturgy that you have that's important, particularly good preaching that focuses on people's lives, and good scholarship hopefully behind it, so that you link the world of the text of Matthew's Gospel, say, to the world of today. But besides that, it's important to have quiet times. So more recent time, our steering committee here decided, after a bit of a feel about the place, what would be interesting to do. So they've set up a meditation group that meets on a Tuesday evening for about an hour and a quarter, and that's really running very well. There are other sort of groups, like there's a feminist theology group, there's a women's reading group. The men wanted to have their own reading group, so they come in on another night. And so various groups that are parish-based, but then we have another group like, say, our spirituality in the pub, which takes reasonably controversial issues, and the Pump House Hotel over there in Fitzroy, and it explores, issues like the Royal Commission at the moment, Catholic identity, a whole range of broad subjects. And often it's the lead-in for people that haven't been to church for a while, come to that and think, I feel comfortable with this group of people, I'll go to church next week, and that often happens. So groups are important. Another group that's very important is our St Vincent de Paul group. It's quite imaginative and very active. When I say imaginative, they've got a fairly big budget because the parishioners are very generous, and they send fruit and vegetables into two remote indigenous communities in Australia, in the far west of Australia. That actually has turned the health around of those villages, those camps. And that's fairly expensive, but it's a life-sustaining quality of health thing that's important. They also do a lot of work of accompaniment of refugees. They're sponsoring a family in a home setting. But besides that sort of imaginative work, they also have a disability scheme going for students here at the university and RMIT University, particularly students with physical disabilities. They often get equipment for them so that they can see or hear or whatever. Besides all that, they do the gutsy sort of day-by-day stuff in the high-rise flats in the area, the social housing, where there's many a sad story, and accompany people there with a sense of dignity and encouragement rather than the sort of demeaning social worker or church worker thing. So that's sort of the groups, I think, summed up in that sort of perspective in parish life. I chair the Human Ethics Research Committee at the University in Behavioural and Social Sciences. I chair that, but I also sit on the Arts and Education one and the Medical and Health Sciences one. Besides the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, I'm the Deputy Chair there of their research work. This really brings you into contact with a whole new echelon of people. Often went to Catholic schools, but somehow have dropped away, and just the relationship that you build up with your committees becomes a whole point of catechesis again. And often the young people that come before you to get their master's or their honours thesis or their doctoral thesis passed, because you can't work with people these days unless the committee clears it so that there's no offence or hurt to research subjects. For example, just the other day we had one on rape as a strategy in war, and it was in criminology, and it was a master's thesis. So we had to say, well, how will these men and women be approached? How do you know that they've been through this traumatic experience? We had to ask questions like, when you've got all your data for research, this person may go away like with their tummy ripped and heart ripped open. So what's going to happen in terms of healing them after this revisiting trauma? So those committees are very interesting because there you meet the bright and up and coming students. And just the last couple of weeks, two of those students have been received into the church and they wanted to do it at Mass. They were quite proud to be welcomed. So, it's those sort of things that happen through governance committees of the university that I work on. A priority for me would be preaching, to really prepare how we explore the Word, how we explore particularly the Gospels. And so the Church now has an extraordinary reservoir of new ideas and research and learning in the area of sacred scripture. It would seem to me that we need to get this out of the academy where it's been nurtured into the parishes. And I take a great delight and an energetic response in trying to explore the text, see how it fits with today's world. An example just recently when we had the give to the emperor or to Caesar what Caesar's, give to God what is God's. When I looked at that text, I found that it's not about taxes at all. It's about the authority of Jesus. And so just to explore how does the authority of Jesus that goes from, or Matthew's community has taken that authority and that presence into their new, what we now call church, leaving behind the temple and the synagogue, honouring both is a thing that we have to look at, so that while we have an excitement about this new community called church, we also have a respect for those that nurtured and were carried by the law and the prophets in our Jewish people. So we sort of explored that sort of thing, and for people to explore the issues not in just a holy sense of looking back, but in a dynamic sense of believing now is most important.